All right, good evening and welcome to the New Haven Museum. My name is Cynthia. I'm the Director of Programs and Planning here at the museum. Big thank you for coming out on this lovely evening. We greatly appreciate it. Did you know that the White House was nearly torn down during the Truman administration? New Haven architect Douglas Orr was instrumental in saving much of it. Tonight, the New Haven Museum will celebrate National Preservation Month with the second program focusing on the work of architect and visionary Douglas Orr. Before I introduce our two speakers, I would like to bring up Mike Waters, Vice President of the New Haven Preservation Trust, our partner for our two Douglas Orr programs this month.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cynthia. We are really pleased to be able to partner with the museum on this. Douglas Orr, as you will learn tonight, not only was an extremely prominent and prolific architect, but one who shaped New Haven in really profound ways during his 50 years in practice. And so I just want to quickly advertise, if you didn't pick up a copy, the Trust has produced a very large guide to his work here in New Haven and the surrounding area. The contributors, Karen Krochmal, Jean Pogswood, Kyle Dreivik, are here tonight. Please pick up a copy and explore. Use this lecture, and hopefully you came on Saturday as an entry point to explore Orr's work. And you know, one of the other reasons this is Preservation Month, why this is so important to bring attention to Douglas Orr, who, while very, very well known in his own time, perhaps is not as well known today, is that, you know, Orr's work, while I said he was very prolific, you know, has been demolished in recent memory. So, you know, Gibbs Laboratory, a Sanborn Insurance Company, Urban Hall, all demolished between 2010 and 2017, and under demolition currently is the Accelerator Laboratory and also the Helen Hadley Hall. And so, you know, it's important to bring attention to architects like Douglas Orr so that people realize that this is part of the cultural heritage of New Haven, and his importance is part of its architectural legacy. Finally, just on a note of preservation, I want to encourage everyone, not that preservation, you know, has to be the focus of the lecture. In fact, there are many other things, but I want to acknowledge that, you know, this is a trying moment for the preservation community, because the state historic preservation organizations across the country's funding has been frozen from the federal government. And so I would really encourage you all to write your representatives to make sure that money is unfrozen, so that many of these SHPOs, including one in Connecticut, are in the process of having to make decisions about laying people off. And the SHPO is really a critical element of preservation here in the state. So with that, I will pass it back off to Cynthia. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Mike. We are so happy to have two speakers here tonight to share their knowledge about Douglas Orr, his life and work. Cynthia Wrightsman is the archivist for the Willoughby Wallace Memorial Library in Stony Creek, Connecticut. She formerly worked as a research historian investigating Superfund sites and other environmental issues for corporate clients. Douglas Orr, Logan, he began his career as a book editor in New York, focusing on U.S.-Soviet relations and Cold War topics. He went on to spend 35 years in the marine publishing field, writing and editing articles about boats, nautical gear, and the sea. He is the author of Boat Sense and Two Things, a Cold War publishing story, an electronic memoir. He lives in Stony Creek, Connecticut. Welcome, Cynthia and Doug.
Let's start in 1949. Here on the left, you see Douglas Orr, and on his right is Frank Lloyd Wright. They are at the 81st convention of the American Institute of Architects. and Orr is in his second term as president of the organization. He's just awarded Wright the Gold Medal, the highest award given by the American Institute of Architects. By 1949, Douglas Orr had reached a turning point in his career. He began in New Haven in the 1920s, and his firm had grown with contracts with Yale University and Southern New England Telephone. He had been past president of the Connecticut Architectural League and the Connecticut chapter of the American Institute of Architects. He was also former director of the New England Region American Institute of Architects. And in 1949, here he is in Washington, D.C., at the head of the organization. The gold medal goes to someone with a significant body of work of lasting influence. And they had chosen Frank Lloyd Wright, but not without a bit of controversy. The Westchester County chapter had lodged a formal complaint. The qualifications of Mr. Wright have been and still are subject to serious question. Wright was not even a member of the American Institute of Architects. Orr gave a quick and straight-to-the-point speech prior to awarding Wright the medal that sounded a bit more like a roast. Here are a few of his words. He, being Frank Lloyd Wright, has never met the requirement for trusteeship, which is the cornerstone of the architect's duty to his client. He has never met nor cared to meet a budget. His wake is littered with roofs that don't keep out the rain, heating plants that don't heat, the hulk of experiments that had to fail. The same rotten spots that are in his character show up in his buildings. He has charged this world a high price for living in it. But when enough people living now have died, and when the broken lives and broken hearts and the broken pocketbooks he has caused have been forgotten, there will be something left. And it is to that something that this medal is a tribute. He has moved men's minds. He has lifted men's hearts. So I love this because we see Orr's personality come through. He is funny and witty and mischievous and filled with charisma. Wright had written Orr ahead of time, saying that his remarks would be extemporaneous. And so he went on to give a long-winded speech in which he preached against the machine, we don't know what that is, and insulted his peers. Here are a few of his words. No man climbs so high or sinks so low that he is not eager to receive the goodwill and admiration of his fellow man. He may be reprehensible in many ways. He may seem to care nothing about it. He may hitch his wagon to his star, and however he may be circumstanced, or whatever his ideals or his actions, he never loses the desire for the approbation of his kind. So I feel humble and grateful. I don't think humility is a very becoming state for me. Later he says, now of course architecture is in the gutter. It is. I have heard myself referred to as a great architect. I have heard myself referred to as the greatest living architect. I have heard myself referred to as the greatest architect who ever lived. And he went on. His speech was about 10 to 11 pages. So I love this moment where Orr, who is known to be a very practical architect, who's involved in his community, he meets his budgets, he gets his clients what they want, meets his antithesis. So here's just a brief chronology of his early life. This is how his career leading up to becoming the president of the American Institute of Architects. And you can see that even before he gets his degree from Yale, he's already practicing. This house is on Flying Point Road in Stony Creek, and might be one of his first home designs that he brought to fruition. He designed it for his brother-in-law, Thornton Converse, and the design is Norman Revival, a style popular following World War I, when Americans brought home the influence from Normandy, France. I guess most of the buildings in France are known for their brick, although Orr here uses granite. And so he also designed homes for Stony Creek summer residents that he knew. He did summer in Stony Creek. That's where his wife's family had summered forever. And this has the home of Dr. Toms, who was a doctor at Yale New Haven Hospital. And Orr designed this home for him in Hamden, 1922. And I love the very simple drawing for this colonial house. So I'm just going to take you through a chronology of Orr's work. I probably should have told you that before. So start you off with this funny story, and then I'm just going to take you through chronology. And of course, it's not everything he did because he designed so much. It would be impossible for me to show you everything, but so you're getting the things that I found interesting. And here's something I'm sure you've all seen, this 1928 World War I memorial flagpole, which honored residents who had died during World War I. And the base has 8 sides. The east face has a dedication to their heroic sons who fell in service to their country. And the other 7 sides had bronze plaques with the names of residents killed in the war. The round base just below the flagpole has a bas-relief, allegorical, and military figures. And you can see here his lovely drawing and even a site layout. And here's the current. Okay, so here's the New Haven Lawn Club, added to the new National Register in 2003. The club was first founded in the late 1800s for lawn tennis, and eventually built their clubhouse on 193 Whitney. The first clubhouse burned down in 1929, and Orr was commissioned by a committee at the club to design this one, which opened in 1931. So this is from Architectural Forum, which states, distinction and character are obtained directly and simply, using a few materials as possible, and relying on proportion, arrangement of elements, scale, color, and detail for the effect. The exterior is made of Connecticut light brownish red brick. It has a Vermont slate roof and cost $298,000, the whole building at that time. Can you imagine? So on the left, we have the entrance from the ballroom forecourt, and on the right, the central arch for the main entrance. And of course, a typical window for Orr above that entrance, the round 8-sided. And you can see the pilasters on the side of the doorways there. And some layouts. Some exterior shots from that same Architectural Forum article, and how it looks now. So here's the Quinnipiac Club, a colonial revival architecture with dark red brick, limestone trim, ivory painted wooden trim, a dark purple slate roof with a steel frame. And the building originally had 2 entrances, one for men, one for women, and separate dining rooms. It was thought improper for the 2 genders to intermingle informally upon arrival. In 2012, the Quinnipiac Club merged with the Graduate Club to form the Elm City Club. And so you can see here some of the nice walnut paneling in the lounge. Very classic looking. Very traditional. And here it is today, still there. 2022 was bought by Biohaven Pharmaceuticals. This one here is from 1932 at the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station. And Weidersheim I'm probably pronouncing his name incorrectly. But anyway, in 1980, he wrote an article for the New Haven Colony Historical Society where he talks about Orr's work. And he mentions this building, and he does not like it, but I kind of do. His round windows are lower here than they usually are up tall, and the entrance with those nice thin lights at the top, I don't know. I think it looks good. And here it is today. You can compare it to the way it was in 1932. Now there's an addition on the end that looks very modern, but... So this is from 1932. The Stone Trust Corporation is actually the legal entity name of the Book and Snakes Society. So we're going to talk about Yale, because Orr had a huge impact on Yale. And we'll just take a little detour here from our chronological journey. The Book and Snake Society originally was a 3-year society, but then eventually built their Ionic-style tomb in 1901. And in 1933 became a senior society, which is when I think around that time that Orr designed these interior shots. But I have a feeling that they never came to fruition, because otherwise they probably wouldn't still be in the file. He also designed some outdoor drawings you can see compared to the Lewis Metcalf building here from 1901 that Orr had designs for some windows and decoration, which never came to fruition. And here's another senior society. This one was like all works on this project were to be the best of their respective kind. And nothing was to be purchased without approval of the architect in charge of decoration. I love it that he's designed even the chairs to go in the furniture for the room. So a lot of these dorms, he did some interior renovations. He would change dorms into classrooms or classrooms back into dorms. He did a lot of work for Yale. He also did work for other colleges and universities and advised them on their plannings, like for Princeton, Mount Holyoke, Oberlin, the Coast Guard Academy. His firm also did a lot of technical work on scientific labs at Yale. Here's the Lippard Laboratory. A lot of times Orr worked with other architects on Yale buildings, and he would be the guy who would keep the project, on budget, on time. He was the reliable one. And of course, here's Orr's probably most famous building in New Haven, the Southern New England Telephone Headquarters, which he designed with Roy W. Foote. Foote was actually the elder and most experienced architect. It was put on the National Register here in 1997. Let's see, what else we got? Some details of the building on the outside. From the Historical Resources Inventory, it says, it was a radical departure from the colonial revival and neoclassical designs that had dominated popular taste for the first 3 decades of the 20th century. The architects turned their back on local history and took inspiration from urban centers like New York. When asked about the project in the 1950s, Orr responded, "I believe the headquarters building was both interesting and annoying. This was, I believe, the most forward building of its time, a time when architecture was swinging in a circle towards contemporary. People are slow to accept change, and we're slow to accept this." It was the tallest building in New Haven until 1966. It's hard to imagine, right? So it has a lot of these lovely architectural details on the outside. Note the doors on their way in. We're going to see these doors again in his other designs. How it looks today. So it has marble walls with painted Greek fret banding. And you can I don't know if you can see it in that picture. Here we can see the metal flying geese ornaments. And you'll see that large tablet over the entranceway there to commemorate the establishment of the world's first telephone exchange in New Haven in 1878. So probably one of Orr's most well-known buildings in Stony Creek is his own house on Prospect Hill. And I imagine the neighbors were rolling their eyes when he came up with this. Mostly in Stony Creek we had little cottages. But Orr's wife's family, the Converse family, had owned a summer cottage on this property, which was probably damaged in the 1938 hurricane. And so he constructed this house right before World War II. It's brick in the international style, which one person has told me was designed to look like a ship when viewed from the water. So it has the flat roof, the ribbon windows, smooth wall surfaces, and asymmetrical facade. In 1940, Orr gave a seminar at the Yale School of Architecture, and he wrote, "The architectural profession, if properly practiced, is not a designer's job. I do not mean to minimize design, and of course design is an important element, but the vital part of architecture is the knowledge of and ability to solve a myriad of major and minor problems which arise in everyday existence." So I actually got to go inside the house, so I'll give you a little tour. It has this lovely paneling here in his living room. We can, the owners of the house still had a few of the original drawings, which they showed me, so we'll see some of those here. I noticed the front door, a similar design as the SNET building. And of course a nice round window, so you can view the Thimble Islands. And this one here on the right is just right inside the entrance. That's your view when you walk into the house. So Orr's career grows a lot in the 50s. He takes on, he has a whole firm. He has a whole bunch of people working for him to make things happen. And he's able to, go work in D.C. This is 1949, the Church of the Redeemer, which is Georgian design, which Wrightsman calls his best and happiest. Here are some drawings from that. And how it looks today. The brick and the wood pilasters. A lot of beautiful details on this Georgian building. Here's the interior of First Church of Christ Scientist at 691 Whitney. And again, those doors, they come back. And you can see how the building has changed. So even though it's not used as a church anymore, it's now become the Worthington Hooker School. It apparently is still very usable for their needs. So here's a very basic building. A nice simple box. The First National Bank from 1950. And here are his designs from his firm. Who knows if he actually did them himself, but making it a very functional, easy building, probably on a very slim budget. And here it is now, still used as a bank. So I think he did his job. And another box. This is the Branford Masonic Temple. Wiedersheim describes Orr as a joiner. And he was a member of a whole bunch of different clubs and organizations, which are too numerous to list here. But he was a member of the Branford Temple for 37 years. And inside, he added, in the cornerstone, a stone from the 1792 White House, which had been saved from the building when it was burned in 1814, with Masonic markings. And according to Orr, similar stones were used in the restoration of the White House kitchen. This temple was dedicated in 1955, and a newspaper reported that it had no extraneous or unnecessary elements. The walls were just cinder blocks, pretty much. And in 1959, they honored him at the lodge for his design. He also designed other Masonic temples around the state and received similar honors at those temples. And here's my favorite building, the Willoughby Wallace Memorial Library, constructed in 1958, that Douglas Orr donated his services to design the library. And the project was overseen by his brother-in-law, Thornton Converse, who was also, Stony Creek residents. The building is mid-century modern, meaning that it emphasizes its natural surroundings, has clean lines, lack of ornamentation, an open floor plan, large windows, and functionality-based design. And unfortunately, they didn't have computers back then, so didn't know about all the outlets we would need. It is made with has Stony Creek granite on the outside, which was donated by the nearby quarry. And here's the original floor plan, and it's amazing to me how little space he left for books. The library did have a little bit of a renovation in 2002, and just in the past few years, our library director finally added a sign to the front of the building. Or did such a good job blending the building into its surroundings that no one could ever find it. But now they can. So here's Orr on the commission of the renovation of the Executive Mansion. He was the only architect on the commission. And I'm just going to leave it to Doug Logan to tell you the rest of that story. But I just wanted to mention it here. Here is one of his biggest undertakings, the Taft Memorial. This is a photo of it under construction. In 1955, President Eisenhower, appointed Orr to the Commission of Fine Arts, which advised the government on the location of statues and monuments and construction of buildings in Washington, D.C. And Orr was selected that same year to design the Taft Memorial. Taft had been a senator from Ohio, and he was the son of President Taft, and had been a friend of Orr's. They asked him to build a bell tower, which he said was too ethereal for such a staunch constitutionalist as Taft. But the committee insisted. Here it is today. The monument is a 100-foot Carillon bell tower of white marble from Tennessee. There are 27 bells in the tower made in France. The memorial has a 10-foot bronze statue of Taft created by Wheeler Williams. Williams had already created a bust of Taft in the past, and so he was an obvious choice for the job. And Wheeler also had a summer studio in Madison, Connecticut, which Orr thought their close proximity might be useful. At the dedication ceremony in 1959, President Herbert Hoover stated, "When these great bells ring out, it will be a summons to integrity and courage." Currently, the architect of the Capitol says the bells are turned off due to deterioration, but they used to play during presidential inaugurations and on the 4th of July. 1961, the First National Bank. Orr was director of the bank. And as Widershine points out, Orr was essentially his own boss. So he could have built anything he wanted to. But what he chooses is a very practical and financially prudent building that gets the bank business done. In 1963, 37 years after Orr had gone into business under his own name, he took on partners, DeCassi and Winder, and to carry on his legacy for the firm. This is one of the recognizable buildings in the brutalist style. So I'm just going to leave you with some words by Orr about architecture. Architecture, in its broadest terms, deals with organization and arrangement of space so that it serves its function and does so aesthetically. It is both an art and a science, but also involves economics, sociology, and other influencing factors.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. It is a little soggy out there. And thank you very much to the New Haven Museum, and especially to Emma Norden, who put on a wonderful exhibit last Saturday. And also to the good people of the New Haven Preservation Trust who showed up on Saturday with this amazing fold-out document that has color photos of over 50 Douglas Orr buildings in and around New Haven. And also a short biography of them that I think is really perceptive. Right? And they're on the table back there. Should get one. Ella Grasso was a lifelong booster of the state and of the idea of local involvement and local pride. Bloom where you're planted, she used to say. It's an inspirational statement for people who have a deep taproot. Douglas Orr bloomed where he was planted. He was a national figure, and his work still exists in many places around the country, but the bulk of it is in Connecticut. He traveled and visited widely, but except for an army stint in Oklahoma and a sojourn in Europe when he was on an architectural fellowship, he never lived anywhere else. He was a first-generation American, the middle child of Scottish immigrants, Adam Orr and Mary Henderson Blair. Adam arrived in the United States in 1884 at age 20 and settled in Meriden. His parents arrived 2 years later. Adam's father, Adam Sr., was 51 at the time and had several other children besides his namesake. He was a carpenter by trade. Young Adam may have known Mary Blair from Scotland. She was apparently from a shipbuilding family in Glasgow, or near Glasgow, and the Orrs were from a couple of villages to the south on the River Clyde. Adam Jr., Douglas Orr's father, became a butcher and meat seller, still living in Meriden, with a shop in Southington. He and Mary had a daughter, Marion, in 1890, and my grandfather in 1892, and a second son, Gordon, in 1895. Douglas Orr went to the recently established Meriden Public Schools and graduated from high school in 1909. And then, according to a modern history of New Haven by Everett Gleason Hill, which seems to have been based on interviews of living residents when it was published in 1918, he went right to work for the H. Wales Lines Company in the engineering department. Lines himself was a mason and a state senator and had built up a major construction business that made buildings all through the area. The connection was strong even after his death, Lines' death in 1927. Quinnipiac Club, which he had just showed us, 221 Church Street, was designed by Douglas Orr and built by the H. Wales Lines Company in 1930. In 1911, 2 years after Orr started working for Lines, his father, Adam Jr., died from diabetes at age 47. Adam's mother, Doug's grandmother, died the next day, unaware that her son had just gone before her. My grandfather at the time was 19, and when I look at all the published timelines of where he was and what he was doing for the next 5 or 6 years, the dates and ages are hard to line up. Those deaths, no doubt, put the family in turmoil and probably into financial difficulty, at least temporarily. There are no records of it, and anybody who would have known what was going on is gone. But we do know he was working for the Lines Construction Company when his father died, and that right around that time he was enrolled at Yale and had been taking classes in the School of Fine Arts. He was obviously a local, a townie, and no scion of the rich or powerful. He was bright, though, obviously, and I think if I had to guess how he got into Yale, I'd say he probably brought some engineering drawings and diagrams from the Lines engineering department. This would have been when the study of architecture was part of Yale's fine arts curriculum. It didn't become a full department, I think, until 1916. But on the 1st of January, 1916, according to this modern history, Orr went into business on his own account as a member of the firm of Orr and Booth Architects, his partner being Robert H.S. Booth. So at 23, he was in business at the same time he was studying for a degree. They got off to a good start. From the same book in 1918, the firm has already gained an enviable reputation and has designed the plans for many important buildings, including the office and factory of the Connecticut Telephone and Electric Company, a storehouse for W.J. Cahill, a storehouse for the L. Suzio Construction Company, the community building at Granby, as well as a church at that place, an apartment house in Meriden for D. Gaffney, and residences for C.H. Buck and J.H. Stiles at Reading, Pennsylvania. The firm also had the contracts for a number of buildings, the erection of which has been postponed on account of the war. So sometime after the United States joined the war in Europe in April 1917, Orr's partner Robert Booth joined the Navy, and then Douglas Orr joined the Army, and that was the end of that firm. My grandfather at that time was 25 and still hadn't finished his degree. I remember hearing stories when I was a kid of his flying around in the passenger seat, the back seat of biplanes, doing sketches, which I thought was pretty cool. And then a year or so ago, I went through a folder of his wartime papers and drawings and got some particulars, which covered a year's time between December of 1917, when he had just been married to Helen Marion Converse, my grandmother, to November 1918. See if I can dial up a picture there. So this is a portrait he painted of his bride, and I think in the 1920s. I thought I'd talk a little bit about what he was doing that year because we know there are papers, the Army papers tell us everything. And it's a good illustration of his character and his enthusiasm about trying new things. After serving as a private and then a sergeant, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant and sent to Fort Sill in Oklahoma, which was a major base for field artillery, and as of 1918, something called the School for Aerial Observers. So that explained the biplane rides. What he was doing there was designing a miniature range at the Field Artillery Firing Center. Here's his description in a letter to his commanding officer in the Signal Corps. The miniature range is an installation to simulate indoors the cooperation of aircraft and artillery in the control of artillery fire. A large picture map is used to represent the Earth's surface. Above this map and in a position to see all parts thereof are situated the airplane observers. These observers report corrections on shell bursts, which are simulated by an arrangement of electric lights under the picture map. Well, the picture map ended up being a topographical model built in 3D with 2 villages, roads, woods, and other features to give the proper perspective to aviators flying and signaling by electric lamp from high altitudes up to about 4,000 feet. Let's see if I can get my clicker here. So this is his blueprint for one of these buildings. The building that was to encompass the miniature range was 3 stories, about 40 feet square, with balconies for aerial observers and a surrounding gallery for artillery observers and operators. The 3D map was about 15 feet square in the middle. So you can see the gallery. I don't know if I can blow this up very well, but this is the map, and there's a surrounding gallery that the observers would stand on and do their calculations to correct the artillery fire. He drew schematics for electric and signal wires, switches, telephone lines, electric batteries, and buzzers throughout the building. And these show the signaling lamp bank and central control board. The idea was to build 16 of these buildings for training purposes at Fort Sill. In reality, the first installation wasn't quite complete when the Signal Corps, who liked the idea, decided that it would best be carried out at Camp Alfred Vale in Little Silver, New Jersey. So they sent my grandfather there, and a few months after that, they sent him to finish the project at the Electrical Engineering Department of the Sheffield Lab, Yale University. I don't know who had the influence to make that happen, but in one of his letters to his commanding officer, he dutifully noted that he was residing in Stony Creek, but that his working hours in New Haven were 8 to 5:30. There was a bit of a holdup. There's a bit of a holdup in the miniature range project because the Bureau of Standards in Washington took a long time to produce what my grandfather called a ray gun. This is a preliminary drawing he made of the interior with the gallery. You see the gallery, and then the villages down here, the ray gun, and some other equipment and notes. This wasn't a ray gun like the ones we think of in science fiction. It was just a set of metal tubes representing the guns of an artillery battery, each tube containing a light and a focusing lens. It would be mounted on a ball and swivel joint and fixed on a balcony so that it could shine on the 3D landscape below, showing pinpoint shell bursts and being controlled by artillery students learning the skills of range finding. It would replace the lights originally intended to be under the picture map because in 3D the map was opaque, couldn't see through it. And as you can imagine, all this would eventually involve a lot of calculations for angles of observation, fire correction, and so on. Just as he finished the prototype in November of 1918, the war ended. Some progress had been made in airborne radio communication, but it was unreliable and the gear was heavy. And the aerial observers still preferred flying low and dropping notes wrapped around stones to communicate with the people on the ground. But 22 years later, during the Battle of Britain, at the start of World War II, the Battle of Britain, as you remember, was an all-aerial battle. Command facilities with large-scale map rooms, observers' galleries, and coordinated lighting systems were established and linked not only to air-to-ground communication, but to radio direction finding, and then the latest invention, which was radar. It was a far cry from people dropping stones out of airplanes. But I wanted to tell this story because in going through these papers, I noticed 3 things, none of which was a surprise. One was that he was meticulous in his drawing and in his letter writing, his thinking. Second, he was psyched. He loved this project. He was excited by it. And third, he seemed a little bit frustrated. You can read it in the memos to the Army Corps that he couldn't get the materials that he wanted to make these things, like these ray guns. He knew what he wanted, couldn't have them manufactured. The topographical, the 3D thing ended up being perfect, but he had gone from trying to make drawings work to trying to build these things, and the materials just even to build the 3D thing on the floor were difficult to find and difficult to work with. He went back to finish his degree at what was now, I think, had just become Yale School of Architecture. He and his wife, Helen, had a daughter, Anne, that's my mother, in 1919. The same year, just as he was starting a new architectural practice, the architectural school gave him the William Wirt Winchester Fellowship, which, according to the school's website today, is awarded each year to the graduating students in architecture whose academic performance has been consistently at the highest level, who have displayed the most promise and potential for a future professional role, etc. The fellowship allowed him to go to Europe and study at the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris and Rome. It was a life-changing opportunity, and he took it. We have letters from him to my grandmother and other family members describing his experiences in Europe and asking after baby Anne, who was only a few months old when he left. I have to say, I wonder how my grandmother took to seeing almost nothing of her husband for the first 4 years of their marriage. This is one of his projects at the Beaux-Arts. It's a measured, drawn, and if you can believe it, watercolored painting he did of Marie Antoinette's boudoir at Fontainebleau. And I can blow it up this way. I have a couple of details. This is a watercolor. It's about this big, by that big. Here's another detail of the upper left-hand corner. And there's another piece, the ceiling of the second floor loggia at the Massimo Palace in Rome. The detail is hard to pick up, but you get the idea. When he came home, he really went to work. He put his shoulder to the wheel and started working. In 1927, along the way, he got a Master's of Fine Arts degree from Yale. And 2 decades after that, he was president of the American Institute of Architects. Not long after the beginning of his tenure as president, when he was 55, he got a letter asking him to report to the White House. It was February of 1948. The White House, which had last had a renovation by McKim, Mead, and White in 1902, during the Theodore Roosevelt administration, was in danger of collapse. This is not an exaggeration. The interior of the building was flexing and bending, and it was likely that sooner or later, probably sooner, there would be a sudden catastrophe, as in the entire second floor drops onto the first floor. So after Douglas Orr and Richard Dougherty, the president of the American Society of Civil Engineers, had finished their preliminary and very alarmed report about the structural conditions of the executive mansion, and just as remedial action was getting underway, Margaret Truman's piano leg fell through the floor of the second story. And that did it. The Truman family was more or less evacuated to Blair House next door. There was a considerable debate in Congress about what to do. Many said it would be cheaper in the long run and probably faster simply to tear it down and start over. Douglas Orr argued strongly that the exterior of such a historic and iconic building could and should be saved. And he had support in Congress, and he had a lot of support from the engineers who would be doing the shoring up of the interior. So their argument won out. They removed as much as possible of the historical interior, from paneling to mantelpieces to little decorative details, by hand, intact, stored in warehouses to be put back again in the last stages of renovation. Then the interior was literally gutted. This was the beginning of the work on the northeast corner. And then, I don't know if you can see it well, that's the interior of the White House. And they took everything out of the interior of the White House and braced it with steel girders and I-beams, and then they braced it and brought everything back in. This is the famous letter from Truman to Douglas Orr in 1952, after the Trumans were back in residence. I can say this to you confidentially: McKinley and White would probably turn over in their graves if they knew that we really have done a job on the old White House. If you're interested in this and more about this story, there's a good book called The Hidden White House by Robert Clara, and he gave a talk here some years ago, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. It's good history writing, not only because the narrative is well researched and intimate, but because it connects its focus to larger events happening around the world at the same time. In fact, halfway through the renovation in 1950, Orr received a secret memo saying that the White House was going to need a bomb shelter in the sub-basement that could withstand a nuclear strike. This is an elevator well in the sub-basement. The photo, and a couple of these photos come from the Truman Library. This is the commission with Truman near the beginning of the heavy work in June of 1949. And Douglas Orr is the third from the right. And here's the same commission 3 years later, June 1952, near the end of the work. I wanted to mention a couple of things about Douglas Orr's practice in and around New Haven. When it came to design traditions and styles, he had a saying that he strongly believed in: to specialize is to fossilize. He was trained in the Beaux-Arts and personally favored what he thought of as a humanistic style, but often with a twist. Here's a statement by Elizabeth Mills Brown, an architectural historian who wrote New Haven, A Guide to Architecture and Urban Design. Orr worked in a transitional style, often using a colonial federal format and streamlining it with stripped trim or flattened ornament, sometimes modern or Art Deco. This was striking but economical. It had great appeal for businesses and institutions, and Orr's practice was immense. He did love Art Deco, not to overlap too much with what Cynthia just showed you, but I just scraped these pictures from the website of the Eli. And again, I don't know what's been renovated, but I think most of it is original. I love that. That's very him. And now we get back to his house on Prospect Hill. It was built in 1940, 1941, just before the U.S. entered World War II, on property that, again, we're not quite sure. One of the houses was my grandmother's family. We think there was another house, nobody knows. But at the 38 hurricane, I agree with Thea, probably damaged whatever was there and gave him an excuse to build this. He and my grandmother had visited Biscayne Bay and South Beach, basically, in the 30s. And we have home movies of some of this. And there's no doubt in my mind that he loved those colors and shapes down in the warm water, and just said, well, I don't know, why not? I'll just do it. I'll just bring that to Connecticut. So he did. It was just built, and it was blacked out during World War II at night because of the U-boat scare in Long Island Sound. There were a couple of U-boats that came down the Sound, so All the houses along the shoreline were blacked out. Later in his career, he took on two gifted younger partners, as he has said, Frank Winder and William DeCassi, both of whom brought valuable ideas and skills in the practice of modern architecture. Bill DeCassi became known for several of New Haven's iconic brutalist buildings, including what's now the Knights of Columbus McGivney Center. Orr wasn't a brutalist architect himself, but he was enthusiastic about the style in general and the creation of modern, interesting shapes made possible by reinforced concrete, and especially those curved forms and flat, jutting, cantilevered surfaces that made that architecture so striking. And the basic materials, concrete and steel, weren't as exotic as the shapes that they could make. And so the client's budgets didn't need to be all that exotic either, a lot of the time. All through his career, he did work to stay within his clients' budgets and deadlines. And that helped him get business, but it also sometimes meant designing buildings that weren't aesthetically special. That Branford Mason's Lodge is probably a good example. Maybe it's more special on the inside. But as Elizabeth Mills Brown said, he always tried to add some detail, a little spice, a couple of grace notes that would distinguish a building. And of course, later in his career, he was more often the architect of record. The Lawn Club, one example, is a lot of the work on the Lawn Club was done by a young guy in his practice, Bill Douglas. And the same was true of a lot of the Yale buildings that were credited to his office. Aside from his commitment to budgets and deadlines and good architecture, I'm convinced that a lot of his success came from his personality. He was funny, he was enthusiastic, he was energetic, he was optimistic. He was really a man of his century. He had a great sense of humor, and he seemed to get along with everyone, his clients, associates, city officials, engineers, tradesmen, townspeople. On one hand, he was a Meriden kid from a line of Scottish tradesmen, and on the other, he'd studied at the Académie des Beaux-Arts and was a member of the Royal Society of British Architects, U.S. Commission on Fine Arts, Smithsonian Committee, and as Thea said, too many other organizations to list. He was friends with a red cap at Union Station in the 1950s and paid for the man's son to go to college. And when I was in college at Trinity in the 1970s, I was visiting an apartment on New Britain Avenue across from the campus, and it was being shored up by an elderly carpenter. And he and I got into a conversation. He mentioned having worked on the Jacobs Science Building across the street, and it was, and it is, a brutalist building. I think it was Bill DeCassi. And I mentioned the firm, and this carpenter just lit up and said he had known my grandfather for many years, and that he and a lot of other Connecticut tradesmen had always gone out of their way to find work on the firm's projects, because the general contractors and the engineers and the equipment operators and painters and carpenters and architects all got along, and the work was efficient and the pay was good. According to his AIA biography, Orr, quote, strongly advocated for better relations and collaboration between architects and builders. He called for improved construction methods and lower costs, particularly for residential work. At this time, the nation needed many new homes built well, quickly, and inexpensively, as millions of veterans, with the help of the GI Bill, could now afford to move out of rented city apartments and into suburban homes. In 1954, he became president of the American Architectural Foundation and initiated a $1 million fund drive to expand research into materials and procedures of architecture, stating research is a profession's investment in its own future. He was indeed fascinated with materials, going back as far as that the 3D map in World War I that could flesh out his imagination. We had a lot of corrugated fiberglass around in the 50s and 60s because he was really interested in it as a building material. My mother remembered being recruited to run and fetch paper airplanes that he'd flown from the roof of their house. He was experimenting with Delta Wing airplanes when she was 8 or 9 years old in the 1920s. And I remember what were very random and strange shapes that he had carved, balsa shapes that he'd carved and had lying around his studio. He cared about how architecture fit in with the times and represented it. He worked especially in projects at Yale with Arlo Saarinen, Paul Rudolph, Marcel Breuer, and many other architects of that generation. He was equally excited by the preservation of what was beautiful and worth preserving, and at being part of the amazing developments of the post-war era and the space age. If we're all born with some degree of a particular talent, he was born an artist. His hand was prodigiously coordinated with his eyes. And like many others of his generation, he came into young adulthood early in the new millennium on fire with enthusiasm and curiosity. He had a natural interest in science, technology, materials, and all kinds of engineering, all the callings of the 20th century. I have very strong memories of him. He died this summer before I turned 11, but we had spent a lot of time together before that time, especially at that house. And then in his last years as roommates, because we would go on family vacations together, my grandmother at that point was in a nursing home. So he and I were roommates, and we were lab roommates, and laughing and carousing and cutting up, and more often than not, when there was a bang on the door, telling us to pipe down. And most of us who knew our grandparents have vivid memories of their houses, and I still remember every space in that house. He had a studio and that thing that looks like a pillbox on top. We called it the doghouse. And you got up there by means of a nearly full-sized varnished staircase that collapsed and could be pulled up to the second floor ceiling. And we would go up there and pull the stairs up after us and while he painted and pretend to hide from everybody, although everybody knew where we were. This is my grandparents' headstone at Arlington, next to here I'll show you the next one. That's the balustrade of the tomb of the unknown soldier. That's a spot of Stony Creek pink granite among many acres of marble. So he was born in 1892 in what Mark Twain had called the Gilded Age. He was 11 years old when the Wright brothers flew. He was curious and enthusiastic, and he tried his hand at many things as an amateur in the best sense of that word. He was in his professional prime for much of the 20th century through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. And he lived until 1966, to the end of the Gemini program and the beginnings of Apollo. 3 years later, Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon. Born in the Gilded Age and lived to see the beginnings of the Great Society. What an amazing time to be present and accounted for.
I just have one comment. When the lawn club, the first one, burned down in 1929, my father was 10 years old and lived on Bradley Street. And his babysitter thought it'd be very entertaining to walk over to the lawn club and watch it.
Was it fun? I'm sure it was. Yeah. Oh, sure. Secretary.
Did your grandfather design the west wing of the White House?
No, I don't think so. No, that was, I'm not sure when the West Wing went on. Was it after that renovation? Maybe someone else was? I don't know. Answer is I don't know. Sorry.
I've always loved the ironwork Douglas Orr buildings, and was interested if you could tell us anything about. There's such a plethora of different kinds of design, and so beautifully done. So I'm wondering how production was done inside the office, and who made it.
I can't tell you. I can't tell you, but Joy Winters here.
I don't know either. My dad was Frank Wader, who was one of Douglas's junior partners. They were taken on, but I don't know the answer to that question.
Sorry. So John Herzing, do you know John? How those things were made?
I didn't hear the question.
Oh.
About the ironwork on his buildings, there's such a huge variety of design, and so beautifully done. And I was wondering what boundaries on the building they did, or
I
where.
wish I could answer that.
We do, I think
Chris, did you come across anything you wrote them out?
In the drawings that we have in the library here, one project is for the McLagan Foundry. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's on Whitney near the canal cut. And the project itself was the custom design of the lattice for that entryway. So maybe McLagan is who McLagan? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. One thing that I could say is that John Herzan years ago gave me a book of French residential design after World War II, and you saw that picture of Thornton Converse's house in Stony Creek. And when I opened this book that John gave me, it was the house. It's right there. There's no question that Douglas Orr looked at that book and maybe even saw it. He may have seen the house in real time, but he looked at that book and said, "That's what we'll do here." So there was a lot of inspiration coming from every angle back then. And I wish I knew about the metal work. I don't know. That's just I don't know. Hi.
Hi, my name is Carol, and I grew up in a house that was designed by my grandmother, 616 Prospect Street. We bought it in 1979 and owned it till 2019, so 40 years.
Oh, wow.
And I might cry a little bit, but that house was perfectly designed. And now as a real estate professional, I own my own firm, which is called the Farmer Realty Group. I named it after the farmer who built the house. I believe it's one of the best designed houses that has ever been in New Haven. I've been in a lot of houses, and I don't know, this was one of my dreams to come to an Orr festival. And if we could, next time we're celebrating him, let's get some people to open the doors of their houses
that's a great
and
idea.
do a house tour.
Yeah.
And,
Great idea.
the folks that I sold my family's house to, it's now a library where they conserve the Thomas Odin papers. It's right across from the Divinity School. So I just want to say thank you. That it's perfection, and I'm sort of sad he sold it, but one day maybe I'll.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. That's great to hear. Well, thank you again, everybody.